Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of Debate Night. We are back once again. Today, we're going to dive into a few different topics. Nothing crazy happened in the world of disc golf this past week. However, the PDGA did announce their proposed rule changes for the next year, which always brings some interesting topics to rehash. We do have some other things that went on this week as well, and then just some general topics to debate. Today, we have Brodie Smith joining us.
I will not be standing, so
There's a chance.
I'm not making any excuses for me not winning, but I am also not standing.
Great tie-in as well.
Yeah, I was going to say that was a great tie-in. Dustin is joining us today.
I am here. The old wash version of Dustin has returned.
Old Dustin is here again. Jonah is joining us. Hasn't been attacked by Burmese python.
No, not yet.
Yeah.
But this is my last time in this room. Next time y'all will see me with probably different colored walls. So
Wow, that's exciting.
um,
and then Matthew is joining us as well from the echo chamber.
The echo chamber is bad, guys. But I'm here to debate. Okay.
What a show we have today. What a show we have today.
So just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show, folks. So we're gonna hop right into this. So first topic, not a lot of storylines came out of the Mid-America Open. You know, it was a weaker field Silver Series, nothing too crazy to talk about. However, Gannon Burr kind of gave us a bit of a storyline. If you watch the event, he ended up in a playoff with Andrew Presnell. They played the par 5 there to start it off. Presnell gets pretty close for birdie. Gannon Burr throws it to about 20 feet, a putt that you're typically not going to see a professional player, especially somebody of Gannon's caliber, miss. Steps up, missed the putt, looked really shaky, then takes to Instagram, where he decides to cite the factor of crowd control, saying that led to his missed putt. Now, he didn't say that was the only factor, but he definitely made it known to everybody that he didn't like the crowd control. People were moving around the green, and that was what ultimately could have led to his missed putt. My question here is this a valid excuse or not? And if it is, does the Pro Tour need to do a better job keeping fans still when they're near the players when they are playing? Brodie, you're out there sometimes, so what do you think?
I would say no and no.
Okay.
Short answer, no and no. For one, if the people do distract you and that is distracting, you can always stop and ask someone to move. I've seen it done multiple times. I've also seen it to where someone's a football field away walking in the background and someone's like, I'm just going to wait for them to finish walking. And it's like, all right, sure. So there's definitely ways to get around it. But to me, two other additional things. To me, I feel the closest comp in competition to a 20-foot putt is like a free throw shot. And if professional basketball players can make free throw shots with fans intentionally trying to distract you behind the basket, I feel like we should be. And again, I haven't talked to Gannon. I haven't seen the footage to know exactly how bad it was. But like if someone in your peripheral is walking, I feel like we should be, as professionals, be able to block that out and still make the putt. But I will say the one thing that does need to get better with crowd control is on par 4s. A lot of times you'll have the crowds in the fairway and they will be in a position to, when they're watching putts, they're standing in the landing zone of the drives. And so players that are playing behind a group like that have to wait almost for the entire hole to be finished. And I think that just causes backups, causes long rounds. That's where I think crowd control really needs to be worked on, is the flow. I think a lot you'll see sometimes like these lead cards, they'll come in like 3 or 4 holes after chase card. And a lot of that has to do with just not being able to move people around quick enough.
Yeah, fair enough. Dustin, what do you think? Do you think it's a valid excuse?
No, not even close. And I'm going to use a direct quote from Gannon Burr, the man himself, to prove that he's wrong. And he said, I rushed the putt. My heart rate was high with all the spectators trying to get on the green while I was putting. Key part here, I should have just waited and took my time. So the man himself like literally called his own self out for not waiting and rushing it in his own social media post. So I mean, like, kind of case closed right there. I mean, you have every right to wait. I know that there's like a 30-second timer and we all talk about that, but like obviously if the crowd is moving, that you have the right to wait for them to get still. As Brodie said, you have the right to ask someone to move out of the way. I have seen it as well, whether it be a cameraman or a spectator to hey, like, you're in my field of vision. Can you please move? You know, things of that nature. Like you have that right to do that. So I don't think it's a valid excuse or not. There were solutions that he could have taken to prevent that from happening. As far as like this approach, wanting to do a better job keeping fans still near players, personally speaking, like from the eye test, when I watch coverage and for the couple events I've been at, I feel like marshals and volunteers are usually pretty good about like holding out the tape and like having people stay behind it and having the quiet signs and things of that nature for like the lead cards and things of that nature. And I feel that, you know, I guess that can vary event to event based on how many volunteers you have. But generally speaking, I don't feel like I ever really hear too many complaints about the topic of like people moving near players while they're putting or throwing or something like that. As Brodie was kind of talking about, I feel like the only complaints we ever hear is spectators being in the way of the flight of the disc, or like safety concerns with, you know, maybe spectator lines being too close to OB lines or something like that at certain courses. Like that's all the complaints I've ever heard. I've never once like heard of, oh, some dude on the bleachers was doing something at the, you know, final hole and it messed up a player shot or something like that. You know, like I don't think we had anything wild like that really happen. So yeah, I think what it comes down to, it's always on the player to choose when to take the shot. You have the option to wait. And I just can't, you have the agency to fix your own issue in that situation.
Sure.
So yeah, I can't see it as a valid excuse.
Yeah. All right. So Jonah, no sympathy so far for Gannon. How do you see it?
I'm not sympathetic. I'm going to jump on that bandwagon, but I am going to say that Gannon Burr, my goodness, did mess up his upshot, his second shot on the 18 during the regulation round. I watched the clip of the Central Coast coverage yesterday, and that's really what led to the playoff. He took a par on 18 where Prez got an easy birdie. He really shouldn't have messed that shot up. It was a, you know, flex forehand that he's really good at. So I think that really should not even come down to the playoff. But that being said, what he said in his post was accurate. He should have waited. Someone who in his past has been called out for his very long, very slow play. So I'm surprised he didn't take advantage of that this time. And the PDGA rule does say that you have 30 seconds from when there's free from distractions. So every time there is a distraction, technically you're allowed to restart that clock. Does that rule get enforced? Hard to tell. Brodie probably has more insight on that than the rest of us do. But if nothing else, this will serve as like a fire in Gannon's belly and take him into Ledgestone with a bigger focus, I think. Especially because not that putting is more important at the Ledgestone courses than it is at other courses, but it helps people convert on those difficult birdies. So
yeah,
definitely something to look out for.
Very good point, especially considering, like you mentioned, he is typically a slower player, a little bit out of character. Matthew, what did you see?
I saw the same thing everyone else saw. Okay. He's not going to get much sympathy from us on this guy. If you just watch the putt, it just looks awful. And, you know, maybe that was because of people, but like I was looking for different camera angles to watch this, and I wasn't really noting some significantly high spike at that time. Now, does the Disc Golf Pro Tour need to do a better job in the future to make sure people aren't walking in front of stuff? Maybe. I think it's kind of in the nature of disc golf to be right up close with the pros, so you have to expect it a little bit. I mean, like you can look back years and see it. James Conrad's holy shot, when he hit that, everyone flooded. Right, there was no concern. He was high-fiving people. Like the disc golf way is never going to be the golf way of just making sure, like it's always going to be a little closer to the pros. It's always going to be a little more in person. But as a pro, it's your job to kind of figure out how to deal with that. And in Gannon's case, I'm pretty confident that it wasn't really the people that were making a mistake, and it was just him playing really fast. But maybe the Pro Tour needs to kind of think about their balance of those kind of things for the future.
Yeah, certainly. It's very interesting. Certain players get really hung up on like the distraction thing. Even if you play a local tournament, there are some people who are like, if you're standing behind a basket, they will ask you to move, and there are others that just don't care. In my opinion, I could be on a highway and I don't really care what's happening. Like doesn't really affect me. The whole crowd control thing will be interesting because like the only way you can really effectively control a crowd in the way that they would need to is with a lot of volunteers. If you go to a PGA Tour event, there's like a volunteer every 50 feet. And anytime somebody gets ready to hit a shot, they are all holding up their hands. And if they see you, they will tell you to hold. Like it's a very serious thing, but it's still not perfect. There'll always be somebody walking in the background. And I think players will learn to deal with that. Anyways, so we're going to move on from that and on to our next topic. So we're going to talk a little bit about some rule changes, like I mentioned, since the PDGA has proposed their new rules. This year's batch seems a little more reasonable than last year, but they're still up for discussion. So one of the interesting ones that I think is probably most needed is their new proposal for a solution for pace of play, now giving them the ability to put groups on the clock, as they quote, meaning that all players within the group would be timed by an official until they're deemed on a good pace. So this is kind of a way for them to almost legalize or make official what they have been kind of trying to do already ever since the Nico incident that we all remember so well. So my question here is this the best way to attack pace of play, or do you see any potential issues with this system? Dustin, what do you think?
So I do think it's definitely one way that we can help pace of play. I think obviously we all know there are certain players out there who take longer to play. And I think we've also discussed many times on this show already, particularly around that whole Nico situation. We were debating about that, players don't want to have to be the ones that have to make the call because all of a sudden it creates drama and tension on the card. Things get personal. And we all, based on that, have also talked about how we need more officials to be able to hand out those rulings and violations. That way the weight's not on the players in those situations. So I think that this idea kind of addresses those issues that we debated about in the past about not having to have the players involved, about having more officiating. And it seems like it's a good idea that you can use this to speed up play by having someone put certain cards on the clock to make sure that they're playing, on time and things of that nature. Now, there are obviously some potential pitfalls of this plan. For one, it's going to be resource reliant, right? Like, is there enough manpower to be able to do this on a consistent basis throughout the entire tour? It just seems like volunteer staff is likely going to vary from event to event. And budget wise, you're probably not going to be able to just pay a bunch of marshals to be out there. I'm not really sure. And this inconsistency in manpower and resources might bring issues of like accusations of bias or favoritism or things of that nature, where like maybe certain players don't get called because they're like, hailed as like super high level players and like everybody loves them. And so like you avoid making the call of those people, especially for volunteers. Like I've seen it happen all the time where volunteers themselves are massive fans. And so they might let something slip potentially on someone that they are personally in favor of. Whereas like you have people that people are biased against, like a Nico, for instance, where like if he's getting called all the time or he's like on one of these time cards, like you start to wonder, like, is there like some targeting going on? So I think equal enforcement is going to be like really the biggest thing about this to avoid like anything. But I do think this is one way to address pace of play, but I think there's other ways to do it too. And I don't want to steal Brodie's thunder, but he's mentioned a couple of them. And so I'll let him talk about those. But yeah, like this is certainly not a bad thing. It certainly can help. There's no doubt about it.
Okay, yeah, Jonah, what do you think about the new system?
It's definitely a start, but I still don't think it's the best way to attack the pace of play problem, especially with AM events. Like Dustin was just talking about the manpower issue at AM events. It's even less so the volunteers and the actual staff themselves. A lot of times it's just a group of a few people who are running the tournament, much less any spotters who are just a lot of times people who are just at the event because all their buddies are there, but they decided not to play that weekend. So, I mean, we'll see how this works out with the other proposed rules with the D tier and whatnot. But definitely in that regard, for AM events, it's something that I don't think is the best way to go. It's helpful, but again, like you got to think about how are these officials getting in between the cards, and does that disrupt pace of play within it of itself? Because I mean, at an AM event, a lot of times the tournament directors, driving around in a golf cart, to try to get in between different cards and such. So you got to think about that as well as that interrupting, pace of play between the cards that are still doing okay. And Brodie has brought up multiple points about splitting up cards and starting later between cards and things like that, and even eliminating a shotgun start in a 3-round tournament might be another way to do that. So just some recommendations on the AM side of things. But then the rule also mentions that the whole group will be penalized if the group's playing too slow, which I mean, just a matter of jargon there, but definitely I don't think if it's only one player that is causing the majority of the time backup, it should really be the whole group's responsibility to play faster. So if I feel like that rule should be modified to say the players should be penalized if they're like, at least if it's one or two players causing the majority of the backup.
Does it say? Does it say specifically the whole group?
It doesn't specifically say one player or players. It does say the group will be, the tournament official has the right to subject the excessive time rule 803 whatever.
I think it leaves it up to the official. Is kind of what the rule spells out.
Yeah, but
how they feel.
The absence of that vernacular of the player versus players, definitely, I just think it's just a good suggestion to maybe make a clarification there.
Yeah,
we'll see how that goes.
You're right about that. I mean, we all know that one of the big pitfalls of rule books and PDGA rules in particular can be that they don't get specific enough sometimes, and they try to fix that almost with every update. Matthew, what do you think about this system?
I think it's okay. There's a lot of the stuff like that I'm seeing in these updated rules for the year. It's like, I think this is the same for all like change rules. Okay, let's see it in action. Let's see how this thing actually works. I did read and I saw what Jonah saw where it said it was going to just like penalize the whole group. I don't think I think that's definitely up to the official there. I mean, it would be wild otherwise. But just knowing that you have someone watching and saying, hey, let's speed this up a little. You've got a time clock. I think that could help the majority of the situations. I don't think that helps with people like Nico, though. Like the people that are just like blatantly out there regardless. I don't think that helps those guys. But for instance, like we mentioned Gannon, sometimes Gannon is a little long. If he's on a watch, if he's on a timer, and he knows that, I think just having that in the back of his head might kind of speed him up a little bit. Okay, so I think it's going to, like those little cases, it's going to take care of all those. But the big cases, it's definitely going to be more, and I think we've all known this, it's always going to be an official stepping in and saying, hey, this needs to be done. So more power to the officials to be able to put people on the clock and be able to, work through that more. But I wouldn't go one way or the other on, it might help the little cases, but I don't think it's going to help the big cases. Not at all, really.
Okay. Well, I mean, in fairness, if they violate it, they're just going to get penalty stroked. Brodie, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely one of the many changes that I've proposed and have wanted to see. I think it was interesting Jonah brought like the AM side because I had not even thought about that. And when you deal with the PDGA, I think the biggest crutch right now that the PDGA has to kind of use is the fact that they're making these rules that are encompassing everyone. And like this rule makes no sense to me on the AM side. It really doesn't. You're not going to have anyone out there to be able to enforce this rule. So I think this makes no sense on the AM side, but I was obviously looking at through the lens of the professional side, and at every professional tournament I've been to so far, there has been 1, 2, 3, sometimes even 4 if you get to some of the bigger events, PDGA marshals on the ground, and it wouldn't be very difficult for them to be able to kind of not only look at UDisc and see if there are some like, oh, there's someone finishing hole 7 and then the next card is finishing hole 3. Like that's a massive backup. I need to get to hole 3 to see what the heck's going on. That wouldn't be very difficult. Or like I've mentioned in past, get a golf cart or get some sort of transportation device and you can literally zip around the course super quickly and kind of be and see where the gaps are. To me, that's what matters the most, the gaps. There should never be big gaps between groups. And if there are, then that's where the PDJ Marshall probably should sit and just see what's going on and seeing if that group can catch themselves up. And if they can't, that's when you got to come in and say, hey, you guys are on the clock. There's a 2-hole gap between you and the card in front of you. So yeah, I don't mind it at all. I think it's great, but it is one of those things of where the Disc Golf Pro Tour and the PDGA being so connected in a way, I think some of these rules aren't going to make sense at certain levels. And I can see the outrage or people getting upset because they're looking at through their lens of how they're going to play and how it's going to affect them. And it might not make sense.
Yeah, it is always a little tricky. And they've started to do some rule sets that are specifically for the Pro Tour type events, but this one they've kind of left up to all divisions as an option.
In this proposal, they actually have a whole section on PG Elite Series majors.
Yeah,
and I think they counted silver events in there. So I'm surprised they didn't. If they had that provision, thought of already, why they didn't decide to include that in that provision and just put it to all players. But it's a rule that they probably thought benefited every level of play, which is.
I mean, I've seen it happen at some of my local events where like someone will kind of like text a TD like, hey, by the way, like this card in front of us is like playing mega slow, and they'll go out there and talk to them. So like it can help at the lower divisions as well. But obviously, like we're really more focused on the highest level of play where it has the most impact, like business wise, spectator wise, things of that nature.
Yeah.
So,
and there's a big disparity between AIM events. Some of them are run very high quality, whereas some are just, your local C tier, now D tier. All right, we're going to hop away from the rule changes. Yeah, pretty much. We're going to hop away from the rule changes for just a bit. We'll get back into some other ones. But this is a topic that we kind of talked a bit about on Grip Block because we kind of had the realization we were looking into. We always like to kind of get a peek into free agency before it happens, see what we can expect. And Eagle and Gannon's contracts both should be ending this year. Sometimes there's some smoke and mirrors when it comes to, they were extended like 6 months ago, but nobody knew. But as far as we know, Eagle and Gannon's contracts should be up, meaning that they are two very high value free agents. So my question is simply, who is the more attractive free agent, Eagle McMahon or Gannon Burr? Well, Jonah, what do you think?
Well, saying Gannon is not the bigger storyline here is blasphemous, so I'm just going to stick with him on terms of who's the bigger free agent. That being said, it's a matter of how much and how long, right? Those are the big two questions when it comes to free agency. How long are you going to lock Gannon Burr up for? Does he want to sign a long-term contract of 5 or more years? I personally wouldn't in his position because he still has a long career ahead of him. There might be something within that time period that boosts his value. Of course, there's incentives and royalties on signature discs and whatnot. And Prodigy seems to be gearing more towards that direction of having different signature stamps and those. I don't know if they're gonna have any creator series type thing. And Gannon would be the player to do that with. And Prodigy also has Isaac Robinson needs to get paid. They want to extend him. Ezra Robinson, Gavin Babcock, Alden Harris, all those guys.
Babcock's already gone.
Yeah, Babcock's gone now, but yeah, so that's something to keep in mind with. And speaking of Gavin Babcock, Gannon's caddy is actually when he plays with Team Discmania. Out of that Iowa area, he's obviously knows all of those guys, and so that could be part of the influence of that whole Discmania rumor. We'll have to see if that manifests in any case or not, but Gannon's probably the bigger free agent. That being said, Eagles contract, I think it'd be really intriguing to see if they release his numbers. I would assume he would stay with Discmania considering he has a great relationship with them. The Cloudbreakers making him a ton of money. To see if that number eclipses the $1 million a year mark. I think as a play in terms of value, he is worth that much. But then again, he hasn't had a season up to his standards so far this year. So we'll have to see where that gets him, and who wins a major this year could, if either of them do, could really impact both of those things.
Sure. Matthew, what do you think? Who's the more valuable free agent?
So I think we have to view this in like two ways that players are valuable. Okay. They're valuable from like a Simon Lizotte standpoint, where it doesn't matter how well he does on tour, he's still valuable. and then you have a performance-based standpoint. Now, I think Jonah's right. If you're out here saying Eagle is the more valuable of the two, that seems crazy. But in Eagle standing, multiple people have these discussions, and I'll continue this discussion. Like, as a manufacturer, how much did kind of Gannon versus Prodigy influence you? Because that wasn't a great relationship with them. Are you interested in having someone who might do that to you as well? You know, like, but if you're Hunter, you say that he's going to go back to Prodigy and lose $300,000. So who knows what he's thinking there, you know? So I would say absolutely Gannon is like what we should be thinking about and what we should be talking about. But as Eagle kind of maybe transitions more into this kind of Simon-like player, perhaps, which I could see really easily. I mean, you have a name like Eagle McMahon, you're set up for it, you know? But if he transitions like that, that could be a reasonable thing. I think we should watch out for Gannon, but Eagle might be doing some sneaky stuff soon.
All right. Excellent points. Excellent points. Brodie, who do you think? Do you think it's obvious or no?
I don't think it's super obvious. I think it's closer maybe than we're thinking about here. I think Eagle does have a massive international fan base that Gannon probably has not tapped into, and Gannon not being at European Open this year definitely didn't help his international fan base. But when you're just looking at the two, if you're looking solely on the play, you're going off of who do I think is going to capture more victories in the next, 5 to 10 years, I think your money probably slides Gannon's way. And then I think the other thing that Gannon has going for him that Eagle doesn't is Gannon's got his kind of his own in-house production company with Alden Harris, Gavin Babcock, Isaac Robinson, Ezra Robinson. He's in this little crew, and they produce a decent amount of content, not just on YouTube, but also on social media. And I think that's super valuable as well. Eagle definitely goes more the route of not posting as often, or maybe keeping his posts specifically to certain type of content and kind of letting his play more do the talking. But I think Gannon's a little bit more relatable maybe to some of the younger kids coming into the sport as well. It'll be interesting to see how that continues to kind of grow. But if I was a manufacturer and I had to put my money towards one of those two, I'm probably leaning towards Gannon at this point in time.
Okay. Dustin, going with the Tide here or big Eagle guy?
So it's going to sound like I'm on the fence at first, but give me a second. I promise I will get to an actual answer. All right. So if you're going performance, because I think Matthew's right, like there is two different ways to view this. Like, and it is up to you then as a company what you care more about: performance or the social media side and the marketing angle, and just like the brand power. Right. On a performance standpoint, I think they're basically kind of on equal footing. Like, both of them are basically ranked top 5 in the world. Both of them are ranked within the top 5 this season for the DGPT standings. When Eagle is healthy, he is a consistent top 10 player on tour and is often amongst the top 5. He's also only 25 years old. So yeah, he's not the same young buck as a Gannon Burr, who I think is only 17, maybe 18 finally. I'm not sure. But he still does have lots of years ahead of him at 25 years old, as long as the injury thing is taken care of. And that's a key thing that I'm going to bring up later, is the whole injury prospect here. Burr, like I said, top 5. Obviously, he's like just won USDGC. He's already, I think, gotten 2 elite wins and 2 silver wins this season. So like the trend is definitely going up, and he's not dealing with any sort of health concerns or real long-term injury risk. And he is still younger than Eagle by 5 or 6 years, which means you're going to get a little more out of him. He's more moldable. The big thing for me though is that if you're looking at the media presence side, Eagle is way more massive of a brand on that front. Like the guy has 130,000 Instagram followers. His YouTube channel is pretty huge. It's like 74K. Meanwhile, you look at Burr, he's way behind on the social counts like Instagram and YouTube. But as Brodie said, it's not just Gannon's individual socials that you're playing with here. He's also, like he said, part of kind of a group that does a lot of vlogs. And I do feel like Gannon has made an effort to be more involved in media, to be more involved in vlogs, to be more involved in, interviews, things that nature, podcasts, to just kind of put himself out there more and more. And so I think if you're a company, you can kind of get behind that, and you can be the one to drive his socials. You can be the one to drive his content. If you can kind of get behind him and give him resources to where he doesn't have to worry about it individually so much. So with that said, Eagle, I think, is currently the bigger brand. And then so if you're going for a short-term marketing play, he's your pick. But if you're thinking long-term down the road, I think Gannon right now is a safer bet due to the lack of injury issues, due to the fact that he's younger, he's moldable, and then he's on such a positive trajectory. And I'm also going to throw it out there real quick. Everyone's saying Discmania, Latitude 64, I think, is the one who needs to make a play here. They do not have a big MPO name right now. They have Kristen Tatar, absolutely. They have some solid, MPO players, don't get me wrong, but they don't have a marquee name like some of the other brands do. So I would not be shocked if Latitude 64 is not involved in the bidding war.
You'd have to think they have some money, and they certainly would be a nice 1-2 punch. I think Dustin, I think you got it there. I think most of you are on the right track. I think, it's easy to think Gannon right away. Eagles brand right now, like he outsells Gannon for sure. But he's also been in this game for a while, and he had a lot of time to build up a big audience. So the question is, will Gannon over time, is that trend kind of shifting? And then there's also the question of, is Gannon marketable all by himself, or does he need people around him like the Alden Harris group to make him likable? Because in that content, he's a very likable guy, and he's but
it's also down to the brand behind you, right? Like, look at what Westside has done for Matty O with the practice rounds to get his personality out there more.
Yeah.
Like, there are just certain players who have amazing personalities and are incredibly marketable, but it takes somebody else to like drive that forward. The player may not take it on themselves to do it, but if you as a brand can tap into it with your resources, you can massively profit from it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where they end up if they get extended. I mean, last year we had Simon prove that you can bring a company up with you, signing the branded player. Now, he did win 5 times last year, but signing a player mostly known for just being a huge brand can be very beneficial to a company. MVP has been a rocket this year. All right, we're going to hop back into, for our last topic before elimination, we're going to hop into another rule change. This one is a proposed reversal. I think a lot of people would welcome. So the PDGA is proposing a reversal of previous rule change, and this rule made it so that players could only clear their lie in a spot taken up by their stance. So effectively, people kind of joked around that you'd have to do a snow angel behind your lie to like get as much clearing as possible. But if you wanted to take a James Conrad style run up, you couldn't clear something, 8 feet behind you. So this would allow you to once again clear anything casual, dead and unattached is what people a lot of times say, behind your lie, as long as it's not closer to the basket and it's behind the front of your lie. So my question is, was this a much needed reversal? Like I think a lot of people think, or should we have kept the lie of the disc more harsh to punish bad shots? Is that something we should lean into more? Some people talk about no run-ups after your drive and things of that nature. So is this kind of a step backward or forward, or are things all as they should be? How does this kind of working? Matthew, what do you think?
This just depends on where you want to see disc golf. Okay. A lot of people have had discussions on like, we don't really have the rough in disc golf. And like Brodie talked about it on Tour Life about like, what if we did standstills or those kind of things? If you're wanting to lean forward towards that, well, this rule doesn't matter really, because you're going to be back in standstill. But if you're wanting everything we can run up, then yeah, we should clear stuff. I think as courses get nicer, generally, this will become less of an issue. But like, if we're leaning towards, we want to really punish bad shots, then no run up, stand still, just clear what's behind your lie. If we're leaning towards, we want to see some cool shots and some really like hero shots, some of those have to come from, we need a long run up or something like that, and being able to clear that whole area. I would be interested in this, like, as this goes on, how this could affect pace of play though, depending on the situation. If some guy is just so specific on, I will have a run up on every single shot for some reason, and they take forever to clean up the lot behind their lie to do that, like that could stick out there. I don't think it's anything crazy, but I think it just depends on what you want for disc golf,
Yeah.
And that's all it is.
Yeah. Very good point. Brodie, what do you think? Do you like the rule change?
I do like the rule change. I also think the wording of the question is incorrect, because I think we do need to punish bad shots, but the question implies that this rule only really comes into play for bad shots. There are so many courses where your disc is in the middle of the fairway, and there's pine cones, there's sticks, there's all sorts of things. And to me, it's a no-brainer of like, we don't want to see people having to tiptoe around pine cones in the run up in the middle of the fairway. That doesn't really make any sense. Kick the pine cones out of the way. An interesting question is like, Trevor, if your lie is 5 feet in front of me and I've got a big stick behind my lie, am I able to pick that big stick up and just toss it right behind your lie to where you can't actually move it? Like, I mean,
strategy.
there is this weird, the way the current rule is, there was a weird thought that was just like, that would just suck. Like if someone had a huge stick right behind their lie, so they just pick it up and what do? They just toss it out, and then the next card comes and that big stick is now like 4 feet behind their lie, right in their run up, but they can't move it. That stick wasn't there previously for other people. So it removes any of this weird stuff. I disagree with Matthew. I don't think it's actually going to slow down play. I think it actually would speed up play, because right now you have a lot of players not knowing if they can move something or not. So there's like this like question of like, hey, can I move this? Then players have to walk over. We have to see if it's close enough. At this point, it's like, if it's behind your lie, get it out of your way and just throw. So this is like a no-brainer. When they first came out with this rule, I thought it was one of the worst rules I've ever seen.
It definitely was met with quite a lot of opposition when it was first released. Dustin, do you kind of agree with that, or is there a counter?
No, I agree with the reversal of this rule very much so. First of all, I don't know about the Disc Golf Pro Tour level, but I feel like this wasn't really heavily enforced anyway at any type of amateur level or local pro scene level. Like I pretty much never saw ever really any arguments or complaints about moving stuff behind the lie. So I just feel like this is probably one of the least enforced rules ever anyway at a lot of different levels. And really what it boils down to is that like Brodie was kind of saying, you know, you can be on the fairway. You could have thrown a really good shot, but you might be screwed if there's debris behind your lie. And I think that no matter how much maintenance you do on a course or how good your groundskeeping is, there is always going to be a chance that there could be some down branches or some pine cones or something along that line that's going to be behind your lie on the fairway, mind you, not like in the rough or something like that off the edges, that you should be able to clear because it's not a part of the course and it's not intended to be there. I think that's the biggest thing. And like mid-round, it could happen. If the wind blows really hard, a branch falls down from a tree, you know, like it just happens, right? And you should be able to move that stuff because you threw a good shot on the fairway and it should be gone. Now, this isn't going to punish bad shots because if you're still in the thick, in the rough, it's still down to like, is it dead or unattached? You know, or, you know, obviously you can't blatantly damage foliage to clear a path for your shot. So like, you're still keeping that stuff in mind. When it comes to the standstill aspect that's been talked about here, that should be a designated zone, right? That shouldn't be like a punishment for a player having something behind their lie on the fairway. I don't mind the idea of it standstill, like, but like that should be like a specific zone that you're playing inside of or something like that. So yeah, I think this is more about just getting loose debris off the field. I also think this goes for objects on the course that aren't a part of the course. So I'm thinking back to last year where Gannon's disc was on a spectator's bag, and there was a question about whether or not, I think he elected to do it because it was just kind of funny to play from behind the lie on top of the dude's bag. But come on, let's be reasonable. Like, if there's objects out there that are not supposed to be a part of the course, they should be moved. This maybe even is like spectator ropes or advertising that's in bad placements. You know, it's kind of the same thing where you don't want to be blocking play.
That has been updated.
Well, that's good, and it should be that way. Now, obviously, it's different if it's like an intended obstacle, intended part of the course. Then obviously those should remain.
Yeah, the Pro Tour for a while there was really holding on to the idea that like banners and things of that nature were part of the course when they had no business being, and that was quite a weird one. Jonah, what do you think about this rules change?
Yeah, you guys took a lot of my best points, but I'm going to definitely wrap it up here by saying that the biggest issue here is player safety, right? We don't want to have people rolling ankles on run-up shots. That's such a bad optic for the sport if that ever impacts a tournament, you know, to an extent. And of course, we want to be proactive with these things, not reactive. So that's a big thing. I think that, I mean, I can't really think of that happening too often. A lot of times it's with slippery tee pads, and that's a whole other conversation where people get injured and whatnot. But definitely we don't want people, you know, stepping on a pine cone, stepping on a twig or a rock out of place to, you know, impact their shot in the fairway, like we've said. That being said, though, we do want to be able to punish shots off the fairway, and footing is a way to do that. Now, does it have to do with debris? I don't think so. I think it should be with the surface they're playing on, whether it be tall grass, sand, a weird, awkward slope. All those things really should be taken into account by a course designer. And then that has, obviously, in addition to the shape of the fairway, the OB, the hazard, all of which should be taken into account. And then, like Dustin kind of mentioned on earlier, I think some additional language about what a course object and what a non-course object is would be really helpful. Something that I remember happening at the 2021 Worlds is Paul Macbeth moving a log that kind of defined a green out of the way without even asking the group, because I believe it was like on top of his disc had wedged itself underneath it for some reason, and he decided to move it within the rules 100%. But if that is considered an object course, a TD can designate that with spray paint or a flag or tape or something like that. Then he wouldn't be able to move that because it's a part of the course. That also helps with if an intentional log is down to eliminate a roller play. Players can't move that because it's an object. It's a course object. So I really think that that would really help define what a player can and cannot move. And so it'd be easier to tell, if there's a limb, hanging, and if it's dead and unattached, then obviously but if it's still on the tree that it's hanging on, then it's still a course object and you can't move it. So definitely some additional language here would be really helpful. I don't think I have any other points because y'all took all my good ones. So, but I guarantee just player safety and making the rule a little bit more fair.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you're right. We'd like course rough to be less about debris and more about things that look planned, and also, having more clear expectations on what is and isn't the course. Because a lot of times, disc golf courses do try to use natural-looking objects to function on the course, which is understandable because it looks nicer, right? Having a log to block a rollaways rather than an advertising sign, for example, that looks nicer, but yes, then by the rules, I can in fact move that thing. So it does get a little blurry there and difficult, but that's going to do it for our main round today. Dustin and Brodie all tied up are going to be moving on, just edging out Jonah and Matthew. So we're going to be hopping on into our rapid fire round now. All right. So we've got one more rules question to kick us off, and then we got a couple other subjects that have popped up recently. As you're all tied up, Brodie, do you want to defer again, or
I'll defer.
Okay, Dustin.
I'll go first then.
Okay,
Dustin. It doesn't matter. Yeah,
Dustin wants to go first. Once again, Brodie Dustin matchup here. So this question is a little bit less about a rule change, more about a topic that a rule change brought about. The PDGA is proposing to update the dress code to more carefully define what is allowed at high caliber events. Previously we had a very loose description of what was allowed. People kind of got the point, but it was like, a dry fit shirt, whereas now it really specifically is going to get into the materials, the cut of shirts. It's a lot more specific, but that really just brought it up to me. I was thinking, since they decided to go back into the dress code rules, but not really change anything, just kind of solidify what they already have. Do you think the pro disc golf scene has settled into a good norm for attire, or is there still more work to be done to display the best looking product? And should they be going back in and rehashing some things? Dustin, what do you think?
I think what we see right now in disc golf is fine. I think that some players are going to go all out with like collared shirts, polos, the pants, the belt, all that jazz. And that's totally fine. I'm down with that. But I'm also think it's totally fine with like a nice, well-fitting dry fit shirt or jersey, some nice shorts or like pants, depending on weather, like the sort of tennis-like attire that I think we've talked about in the past. I think both are totally acceptable for the sport. I mean, the bottom line is in disc golf, you need to be doing more dynamic movements than a sport like traditional golf or ball golf, whatever the hell we're going to call it right now. And so I think to be able to do those movements comfortably and be able to perform at your best, you should be able to wear whatever it is that's going to allow you to do that, as long as it's within reason, right? Like, obviously, I do think it needs to look somewhat professional. Like, we shouldn't be having people out there with no shirt on, which I see all the time in amateur events, by the way. That's kind of rough. Obviously, let's talk about the pro tour. Yeah, it happens 100%.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's
out there, man.
Maybe it's going to be D tiers at some point only where that can happen, the drinking tier. But anyway, like ripped clothes or like things of that nature, t-shirts. Like, I don't need to be seeing someone out there saying to-do list and then my mom is checked off underneath the to-do list thing. Like there are just certain like shirts that are like maybe more profane or like just unreasonable that obviously need to be addressed in rules and not be allowed to happen because we are broadcasting the sport. So with that said, I do think the guidelines that I see now are fine. And I think we're in a pretty good place right now as long as we keep those enforced.
Well, to be fair, there is a clause for the profanity now.
Exactly.
So
I think that was
is
a good addition.
That is there
That's
now.
what I was getting at with the to-do list shirt.
Yes, Brodie, what do you think about the dress code? I know you've shifted in years.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, to answer the question, I don't think there really is more work to be done right now because I'm not seeing on the tour people dressed what I would consider like inappropriately for the professional sport. Now, where are we trending? I will say there were a lot of people, and I won't name names, but there were a lot of people that were like anti-jersey, anti-dry fit. And then what do you know? As soon as they get their name on a dry fit or their name on a jersey, we're seeing a lot of jerseys and we're seeing a lot of dry fits. So I think the way it's trending right now, I think that will kind of dictate, right? Like if more people start going the jersey dry fit kind of tennis attire wear, I think everyone will kind of follow suit. If everyone decides to start going the polo pants, I think people will follow suit as well. All I'm saying is I'm seeing a lot more people that wore the polo heavy people, and now they're wearing jerseys all the time. I'm seeing that a lot more than the opposite. So I think that is where we're trending. To me, that makes the most sense for what we're doing on the course. And I think it also just makes the most sense business-wise, too, for the players and for the sponsors, because I've always said fans do not go out and play disc golf. The majority do not go out and play disc golf in polos.
It's very true. I think I used to be much more on a different side of the argument, but I think disc golf has settled into kind of a fun spot where like the jerseys, they're not, some of them are whatever looking, but I think a lot of the manufacturers, I would say Discraft is one of them, have found a way to make cool looking jerseys that display personality and like who the player is and what they like. Like the Anthony Barella ones are very cool. Like, they've kind of themed them certain ways, but they still
Mania
look.
and Thought Space also do a good job.
Yeah, they do. They still look like reasonably professional, and they just
have always looked good.
Yeah, they look well made. So yeah, I think that we've kind of found a happy medium. I would actually agree that I think the dress code right now, players care about what they look like. They're putting effort into it, and I think that's showing. All right, so we're gonna hop on to the next one. So this one, I actually kind of forgot about this. I had to dig up this clip last night because it kind of popped into my head. So in a press conference a few weeks back, I've heard multiple players have made this claim this season in particular, but there was a specific clip from Paul McBeth in a press conference saying that, talking about the golf courses and talking about these courses that demand players to be throwing so many 95, 100% shots. And he was claiming that, along with a lot of other players have claimed this, that the courses are getting too long and therefore creating more injuries. That's leading to we're seeing more injuries this year and in the past few years than we ever have in the sport. And I think that's just a fact. So my question is, does the burden of these injuries fall on players' preparation? Are they not taking prevention seriously enough, or is course design to be blamed here? Brodie, what do you think?
Well, I feel like there's a softball that you just tossed up to me.
You could argue either way.
Come on.
You get hurt out there sometimes.
Let's say what is going on here. Paul's basically saying European courses are better because they don't require you to have to throw as far, and he can throw far if he wants to, but he doesn't. And he's been playing European courses for over a month. And what happened?
He got injured.
Okay. So what are we talking about here? What are we talking about here? That doesn't help your case, right? Like he got injured. I don't know what the situation is now, because the first report was the Disc Golf Pro Tour said that he, after round 2, went out and was practicing a shot and hurt his shoulder.
His claim was that he hurt it prior to the event, prior to the European Open.
That was the secondary thing, because the first time we heard it was he heard it. He told Brian Earhart or whatever during the broadcast, I guess, that he heard it after the second round. And then I guess after the tournament, there was something different that came out that said, no, it was actually hurt on Tuesday. So I don't know. Regardless, though, it's a tough thing to say that the European courses is what like disc golf needs to go, because like you're not going to get injured and then you end up getting injured playing those courses. With that all being said, though, it's 100% the player's preparation. If any of you guys went out and just sat in the parking lot and just watched what the majority of pros do before the round and the majority of what pros do after the round, you would be shocked. You would be shocked. And here's the thing. If I was a 20-year-old kid and I was an idiot, I would probably be doing the same thing. And I did do the same thing for a while until I realized how important it is to actually warm up, get your body ready to go, and how important it is to actually cool down and recover. And, you know, now that I'm old, I mean, I cannot throw a Frisbee. I mean, Trevor's seen it. I cannot throw a Frisbee unless I do a full, like, 30-minute warm-up.
Got to get the badminton out.
I got to do it. So I think some of these younger players, that, you know, you can roll out of bed and go and play anything athletically when you're young, but it does catch up to you. And I think that's what matters. And let's be real real quick. Let's just be real quick.
Okay.
Disc golf is not on the same level as a bunch of other sports, right? As far as like how hard it is on your body. Sure. And if you ever heard someone came out and said something along the lines of like, yeah, I just think like this sport's like really too tough on my body, they would get flamed on media about that. Like if a football player came out and was like, you know what? The amount of games that we play in the NFL is just too much. I think we should only play 5 games. It's just, they would get flamed. And I think right now the problem is there is a shift, and we're seeing some players take their fitness to another level and take it very seriously. And we're seeing some players not, and the ones that aren't, they're falling in the waysides.
Okay, there you have it. Dustin, what do you think? Are you as harsh on it as Brodie?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm more like 90% on the players and maybe 10% on the course, and I'll get to why in a second. So on the player side, I mean, Macbeth himself said in the press conference that he's capable of more distance, but chooses to tone down so that he can throw good enough distance for the courses, but not have to go all out. And I feel like that is a lot of the way that the courses play right now, is that, like, yes, you do need elite level distance on some of the courses and some of the holes that we are playing, but I don't feel like it's a distance that is too extreme that's like making you have to go all out 100% to be able to do it. Like a lot of these holes, if you can throw, you know, a solid 500 to 550 smooth and not have to like crank out like a 600-foot drive 100% power, like going all out, I think a lot of the times you can do that and still be successful, is what I'm getting at. It's not a requirement of you to have to go out there and like put your body to the max and to put damage on yourself. I think it's also a situation where it is on you to maintain your own fitness and health, whether that be, you know, how you work out, you know, weightlifting help protect joints, what you eat, you know, all those things. I think taking breaks as needed, you know, having a pitch count when you go out to practice, like, you know, your body's limits, or you need to figure that out, and you need to be doing the right things to make sure that you keep yourself safe and not injured. I think Brodie's totally on point, you know, when it comes down to like also warming up and cooling down. Like, you know, it does seem like a lot of people don't really follow that. I know Seth Muncie has tried to push that with like his tent sort of that players will go to pre and post round to try to get some of that therapy, but that is something that needs to be like really more heavily involved. That is on the player to be able to do that. So I pretty much 99% agree with Brodie that it is the player and that there are things you need to be doing to like take care of yourself. But what I will say is that I think we're in a good place right now, and pushing distance a little further or any further does seem like it's just not really necessary. And what I will also say is that there are some occasions on the tour schedule where you will have a stretch of back-to-back-to-back events across 3 weeks where you are playing a lot of rounds in that 3-week period. You're traveling between the events immediately afterwards. You're immediately having to practice the next course. And so there are some patches of the schedule, I feel like, where you don't get as much time, maybe the rest and recover as probably necessary. Now, it could be on you to skip an event if you're not feeling well, right? And you feel like you need that extra rest and recovery. But sometimes it's tough if it's like elite events, you need the points or something like that. You don't really want to have to skip an event. So yeah, I think that maybe that's more of a scheduling thing though than like an actual course design problem of not jamming these big bomber courses right next to each other like 4 weeks in a row or something extreme like that. So that's kind of where I'm at.
I feel like that's a fair point. I think that they could probably help out with the scheduling because it is true. Like we do see these. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brodie. We do see a lot of the longer courses stacked at the beginning of the schedule.
They are longer, but there's a couple things. The first one is like there is this idea that we are throwing 500 feet shots all the time. We're not throwing 500 feet shots. And some of the people that throw far want to throw farther because a lot of these holes, like we'll play a course that's long and we'll throw 2, maybe 3 shots that are like we're actually trying to throw far. The rest are very placement oriented. The other thing that's really weird to me too is, and maybe I'm in the minority here, but like if I go out to the field and I throw 20 zones and I'm trying to throw them 350, which is like roughly around like my stock zone. I'm throwing my full power zone 350. That is just as taxing on my body as throwing a driver. There is no difference. It's not like golf of where you have a wedge in your hand and it's a much shorter, much lighter club than a driver, where it's much longer and much heavier and it takes more effort to actually swing. In disc golf, it's the same weight. It literally says it on the bottom of the disc. We're throwing the same weight shot. So to me, I don't understand how a hole that's 350 feet and I'm throwing my max zone, how that is less taxing on my body than going to a 475-foot hole and I'm throwing a hyzer nuke. It's the same. My body doesn't.
You make a point because although players have the option to disc up and throw smoother, a lot of them don't.
No, people hate.
Yeah, people like throwing hard shots.
We literally saw AB. We saw firsthand one of the top 10 players in the world decide not to do that. Right? Like literally AB was throwing full power max shots, hole 16, shot after shot after shot, versus like, maybe I should like smooth a Raptor up there or something. Right. And that is the norm. Most disc golfers want to throw full shots. They do not want to throw like a 60% shot. And so unless we're talking like super technical, like 225-foot holes, I just don't get either this notion that these like shorter courses are easier on the body. I guess the only reason would be less shots, right?
Yeah,
like shorter course that's a par 60. I guess you're going to throw less shots than a course that's a par 68.
I mean, there's a valid point that like you're right. I mean, a full power zone and a full power nuke, if they weigh the same, should effectively do the same thing to your body. It's in fact the zone has more resistance, so maybe it's even more.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I would just think too, like Trevor, when you guys go out to film a video, I think when you guys like park, get to the hole, maybe do like a little throw like 2 shots and then go. You probably aren't thinking in your head like, oh yeah, this is probably what like the top 20 players in the world do as well. This is probably not what they do. Spoiler alert, a lot of them do that, and that I think that's the big weird thing of where you're just like. I mean, think about any sport, just watching the guy pull into the parking lot or a woman pull into the parking lot, roll out, walk onto the field, and then just start practice. You'd be like, what is going on?
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, and it's true. Yeah. If you watch, I mean, most of the time the disc golf warm up is going straight to the field and launching discs, which that doesn't do anything for your muscles really. Okay, well, yeah, some good points there. We're gonna hop on to the last one. I think this would be interesting to see what you guys bring to this. So UDisc has kind of settled into a stat keeping repertoire at this point. You know, like their categories: fairways hit, C1 putting, OB rate. We all know them very well. They've flirted with adding in some new stuff, but they've kind of stuck to their bread and butter at this point. You know, it's remained for some time now. So my question is, what is a stat that they are not keeping now, or a revision to a current stat keeping system that they do have that would be what would be the best addition to their platform? So we'll see if Dustin can give me an answer that's at least a point better than Brodie's. We'll see what happens.
You should probably steal some ideas here, Dustin. I'm in here.
Well, I have to go first, so I can't steal any of your ideas because I don't know what they are. I can't read your mind, so that's unfortunate.
I definitely have said them multiple times on this show.
I know one of Brodie's, but I don't know.
I don't know. I'm going to say some things, and maybe there's something you said. I don't know.
Okay.
I'm just going to go with what I came up with last night. So first off, what I will say is that before we start talking about new stats, what really needs to happen is we need to be able to record stats more accurately and consistently, because I feel like right now, with it being recorded by volunteers and with only some players being vocal about making corrections in certain situations, you have issues right now where the data may not be the most accurate. A circle 1 putt may have actually been a circle 2 putt and vice versa. How they judge fairway hits, like it just does seem like there are some efficiency things that need to be done to just clean up the stats that are already being collected. And I think that should be like a real priority, to be honest, to make sure that we're getting accurate stats to judge players on. So I would just want to put that one out up front, because I've seen it firsthand caddying at a couple of events, how things have been recorded and things looking kind of off to me. And so I just think that that might be something that need to be addressed. As far as revisions, I'd like a more detailed idea of C1X putting, because I do think there's a massive difference between circles edge putts and being 15 feet away just outside the bullseye, or whatever it is, 17 feet. So I think that would be nice to know, like your circle's edge putts versus like, again, just outside the bullseye. I think the same with circle 2, there's a difference between hitting a 35 footer and hitting a 60 footer. And I would like to have a better idea of which of those are you hitting and what percentage, like just to get more detailed putting stats is kind of what I'm getting at, to get a better measure of how people are performing there. I also think fairway hits need to be a little bit better defined, because obviously we want to judge players' accuracy. But right now, the only way you can do this statistically speaking is like OB rate would be one way you would look at it. You would also look at fairway hit stats, but then the rest of it is kind of down to the eye test. So what I would like to see is if there's a way that we can have like more defined landing zones, like ideal landing zones on the fairway, and how often are players hitting those like optimal landing zones, like something along those lines, like landing zones hit. I don't know how you would do it, but I actually think that would be a really cool idea. I just think that there are issues right now with like what's a fairway hit, what isn't, and being able to get more accurate data. And then again, there is a different quality of hitting the fairway in a spot where you're pinched off for your approach, and then hitting like an ideal spot where you're in a perfect spot for your approach. So I just think that could be something. And then the last thing I'll say is the bounce back stat is actually a stat that is recorded. You have to kind of scroll down to find it. It's not like one of the first stats you're going to see on the player's profile, but I actually think that's a more important stat than like how it's treated. Like how people are able to come back from bogeys, and like, are they able to like keep their mental fortitude and be able to like make comebacks and things of that nature. So I like the idea of having like a more like highlighted like comeback stat or come from behind stat, or things of that nature, and how people can kind of like battle back throughout the course of a round if they start slow, and how they're able to battle back. Brodie, that's a great stat. Shut up.
Yeah, I hear it talked about all the time in other sports. You're right.
Bounce back is a great storyline, dude. I don't care what you say.
No one
Yeah,
cares.
it is.
No one
People do
cares.
care.
It's
People
very
love come
course
behind.
dependent. Oh, I bogeyed the hardest hole, and then I had an easy hole right after, and I birdied it. Wow, my fortitude is really good. It's a stupid stat.
It's not always like that.
It's a stupid stat. It could be, and that's why you have to actually look at what holes they played to bogey and what holes they played afterwards. So therefore, it's a stupid stat.
No, it's not.
Okay. The big issue really here, and this happens all the time. Like, first off, no one wants to do UDisc, right? Like, no one on the actual card wants to do it, so they have to get volunteers to do it. And a lot of times, volunteers might be, obviously volunteering and taking their time out to do it, and they don't know what they're doing, and that's completely fine. I would say when you look at stats, the majority of the people that are finishing at the top of the leaderboard, their stats are going to be pretty accurate. Their first round might be a little bit, but the later rounds will be pretty accurate. But yeah, I mean, there was European Open. My caddy was asked twice to take the UDisc stats, and I was like, no, well, I don't want stats. That's fine. So I always say that is an issue that we're going to have, and the more like we're asking UDisc to do, it's going to be harder, right? I would love what Dustin said. I think that's my biggest one is the putting. I would love to have more of a breakdown of actually what, how many feet they actually were making these putts from. But again, that's going to be harder for the UDisc person to know exactly. Again, we're talking about like, are we making more circles? I think there needs to be less circles. I think the park stat needs to get rid of it. Who cares? Get rid of that thing. But do we need to add in more circles? That would be nuts. I think the stat, if we could, if like in a perfect world, I think the stat that I would love to see most is total feet of putts made. I think that would be a stat that would be the most telling of how someone putted or putt throughout the round. you can actually see that this person made 150 feet of putts. This person made 215 feet of putts. This one clearly putted a lot better, made a lot bigger putts, and maybe even had more to actually make, right? The other stat that I think would be interesting would be like a revision stat. So right now, the OB rate, anytime you go OB, it gets thrown in there. I don't think that makes any sense for putts. Like if you putt OB, or if you hit a basket and it rolls OB, I don't think that OB should fall into the OB rate. I would love to see the OB rate strictly just for upshots and for drives. I think that's where it makes sense. And then also the scramble stat needs to be adjusted as well, because the scramble stat also takes into account if I hit a tree and I'm off the fairway and now I have to try to get up and down for my par on a par 3, that is technically a scramble. If I go OB on a par 3 and now I have to throw in from the drop zone from 200 feet, that is also technically a scramble. I think those don't make any sense at all. And so it makes the scramble stat absolutely pointless, in my opinion.
I do think that I think the scramble is probably the most misleading stat of them all. But I think you're both
that
right.
And bounce back. Bounce back's right there too.
Dustin, defend the bounce back stat.
I mean, look, I'm not saying bounce back is like the most important stat or the one that we should be valuing as much as we value like putting stats or fairway hit stats or what strokes you actually are getting on the field, hitting your greens in regulation. Like, I'm not saying that it's like as cream of the crop, but I do think it's an interesting storyline to see if someone, has a slow start, bogeys out, and is unable to recover and is stuck there. And they're
You're talking about like AM events? Because I could see that.
Dude, no, at the professional level, it's nice to see if someone is able to recover their round or not. I think that's a great storyline.
Oh, like if they bogeyed hole 3 and then proceeded to birdie another like 12 holes, like that's a really cool storyline on a course that like the average score is like 13
stat currently calculated?
It's just currently calculated, I think, by if you're able to stroke better the next hole than the hole you just played or something like that. So
it's a 2-hole range.
No, I think you have to birdie. I think you have to birdie.
No, it's just a stroke better. I think you can par after you've bogeyed and still considered a bounce back. If I read the definition correctly on
UDisc. Now you're hurting yourself. That makes the stat
no,
even
I
more
think it needs to be more refined than that. Like I do think that it needs to be tinkered with, but I do think that there is something compelling about a player being able to salvage a bad round and come out, through on top the rest of the round. Now, maybe that doesn't need to be like a stat versus just like an eye test storyline.
Front 9 versus the back 9.
Well, that's tough too, because on some courses, like difficulty's different between the front and back 9, and so you're going to expect score fluctuations there. I think maybe it's more of an eye test thing at that point. What's that?
As you just said, well, you can't look at the front 9 and back 9 because some front 9s are easier than back 9s and vice versa. That's literally my point with the bounce back. If you bogey a hole, that's hard, and then you birdie the next hole, that's really easy. That doesn't tell me anything.
What I'm trying to get at is I think in general, it's a compelling storyline to see whether or not someone recover around. Upon further reflection, maybe it's not a stat. It's more of an eye test thing that we have to be doing. Like, I just think that is important. Like whether or not someone can recover around or not, whether someone can turn their round around or not. Some people can, some people can't.
Hey, Dustin's got to commentate on this stuff, and he wants stories. Okay. He wants stories. Is that all? That's all he wants.
Again, maybe it doesn't need to be at the forefront compared to some of the other things that we're talking about, but I do think it is a part of the sport and something that can be compelling.
Well, hey, in the comments, I want to hear in the comments down below, is the bounce back stat good or bad? I have no opinion on it, so I just want everybody in the comments to decide: are you team Dustin bounce back, or team Brodie?
I think no opinion is opinion, though. Let's be honest.
Also, let's go back to the fact that
I consider defense.
Also, like, I want to say one thing real quick about Brodie's like total feet putted or something like that. Maybe that just means you're throwing terribly, and so you're having to putt longer. So, like,
you know what?
So
that actually tells a story of, wow, he didn't throw the disc that close to the basket, but he putted really well. Yeah, that tells me something. Great. That bounce back tells me nothing.
You're insane if you're going to argue differently on those 2 points. That's
so
inconsistent.
No, if someone shot 10 under, Dustin, and made 200 feet of putts, and someone shot 10 under and made 100 feet of putts, that tells me that the person that shot 10 under threw the disc better, and the person that shot 10 under and had 200 feet threw the disc worse, but
I agree with
better.
you. Well,
That's
technically
what
the
I
other
said.
person had a chance to putt better because they were throwing so damn good. So, like, are you penalizing that person at that point?
No, I'm not saying that person putted worse. I'm just saying the other
Okay.
person made a lot more putts.
So it's
'cause they
not really a
had to.
putting stat; it's more of a throwing stat.
It's kind of a blend, I guess.
It also depends, because if that person that made 100 feet of putts only shot 5 under, now I'm like, oh wow, they probably.
Then you
weren't
also
able
have
to
the
make any
idea of
putts.
like obstructed versus unobstructed putts. Like I don't know.
Ooh,
if you
that would be
that.
that would be an interesting stat.
Let's get more of that going.
Yeah, I mean,
that would be an interesting
that'd
stat to
be
keep.
Imagine all these people that care about their
That'd be
stats
so hard to
much.
measure,
They would
though,
they
I
would be
feel like.
going hard to the UDisc person and be like,
Be
you
like,
better change that.
That
to
was obstructed. Yeah,
That was
better
obstructed.
change
You
it.
know,
you
it.
saw
Yeah,
that.
like-
You saw that tree in my way, right? Like I had to straddle. That was obstructed.
So
All right.
that's another way to do it.
Everybody go to the comments and argue about stat keeping. That's what we want. Brodie's reign of terror continues. Somebody needs to dethrone him. I'm starting to get annoyed at this point.
You
We
control
need
the
him
points,
turned
so, I
around.
mean,
We need him sitting backwards now. He's standing up. Sitting
He's a
down.
hang
He's
upside down for the next
menace.
one.
I mean, the real thing here is like, how is our 6 aces not a storyline here? That's really what
fake.
at this point, it is disturbing that having 6 aces in one day is just not something that is going to be brought through to the media. Taking a photo in front of a basket and just holding up a 1 clearly is all the proof you need for an ace.
That's just woke media shutting you down, man.
Hopefully moving forward, every single time that someone takes a photo in front of a basket with a 1, we all will not be skeptical at all and assume that it was an ace. That's all.
I have a
hope
question
for.
actually about this. This could be, if you want to take it off the show, we can, but do you actually think pros are faking aces all the time?
So this is where it came up. Ezra said he claimed that he aced this hole. Me and Calvin did not believe him. I mean, obviously Ezra's not lying, so I believed him, but it was more fun to act like I didn't believe
Make this
him.
point very quickly.
Real quick. The thought was, if I'm someone, not a pro, it could be anyone, and I'm like, you know what, engagement's kind of low right now on Instagram.
Okay,
Let me see if I can fix that. And then you just take a photo with an ace. Now, granted, like I still lost I lost a lot posting that many times in one day. I lost a lot of followers doing that. But the point for me, obviously, whenever I post disc golf stuff, I lose followers. The point for me though was to see how likely people are to believe, and I still have people texting
all you
me
proved
like,
is that humanity wants to believe in good, exciting things, man.
Yeah.
That's all you proved.
We
I
need that
mean,
good
come
ace
on.
photo.
3 guys, if you believe 3
You're a
aces
professional
back to
disc
back to back
golfer.
on
You said it yourself.
17,
The sport isn't that hard compared to other sports. So that's the show.
physically, it isn't hard
Hopefully you
physically.
enjoyed every aspect. Hopefully you enjoyed this episode of Debate Night. We'll see you next week, maybe.